Good. Hmm? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Very difficult considering we are through on this topic. So I wanted to get some material in there for us to have the conversation. And my talk today is Islam, Muslims, and the race question. On this important topic. To think about the three racism, the manuals on and so on, all are texts. The intention of these texts is to guide the community of believers. Contained in the texts find ways to live and actualize their life in accordance to the text. The third, and race is a socially and politically constructed term, meaning that it's as a result of social forces, political forces that brought it into existence. It is not a scientific term in the sense that is not based on any type of science, so there is no foundation for it, meaning that the term itself is constructed as a social. The fact that it's socially constructed does not mean that it does not social and economic force. Of mistaking the socially constructed term with the power that term has in the political, social, economic, and I would add religious arena. And again, the term and its implication in the day-to-day affairs. Now the text, Islamic text, the Allah's standard I call it, that we know from the Quran, is very clear on the equality of all, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the differences in our is part of our divine chapter 30 verse 22, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ. And from his signs is the diversity of your languages and your colors. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Indeed, in that are signs for those of knowledge. And then the other verse, chapter 49:13, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسِ, meaning that calling all of people, not only Muslims. إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِندَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلِيمٌ خَبِيرٌ. Say, O mankind, we have created you from a female, a woman, that you may know one the most righteous of you. Indeed, Allah is knowing and acquainted with all that which you do. So again, this is what I consider to be the Allah's standard. This is the golden standard of understanding the origin of all mankind. The Prophet ﷺ, the second source of our guidance, is the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith, and the statement of the Prophet ﷺ that is contained in the collection. This is from the last sermon, خطبة الوداع. يا أيها الناس إن ربكم واحد ألا لا فضل لعربي على عجمي ولا لعجمي على عربي ولا لأحمر على أسود ولا أسود على التقوى إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. Say, O people, your Lord is one and your Father is one. All you are from Adam, and Adam was from the dust of the earth. Over non-Arab, no merit to a white over black or a black over white, other than God-fearing. And then the Prophet says, have I given the message? So this is the prophetic standard. So the text is very clear, both Quran and the statement of the Prophet ﷺ on that. Now we come to the Muslim. The mistake that we often assume is that because the text is clear, racist discourse, and I think this is where I want to chat Muslims and the question of this is just thinking of the linguistic term. هو الذي سماكم المسلمون. It's Allah who called you the Muslims. That's not. We're not engaging in the linguistic deciphering of the term, but how is the term arrived at in relations to the practices and conducts? Muslims today are a byproduct of the colonial, Eurocentric, white supremacist worldview, meaning that my body is Muslim in terms of body, physical, and so on, but that's not what we're arriving at. We are experiencing the world, and the totality of the world we are in is a byproduct of the Eurocentric white supremacist world. If we don't understand this, then we don't understand the past 500 years, and more so in the past 300 years, especially through the colonial period in the Muslim world. Modern Muslim epistemology, meaning how the theory know and approach things, has been in here WD the souls of experience and what they are actually about. Du Bois, in his famous work, The Souls of Black Others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that is the N-word, two souls, two thoughts, unreconciled striving, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keep it from being torn asunder. So again, the lens. One must understand that the term Muslim and Islam today has embedded in it the heavy burden of colonial and post-coloniality, racism and modernity rooted in inferiority and otherization process that has been internalized by the subject, him or herself. I think it's very important for us to understand this. Muslim, rather the contemporary designation both in the mind of the subject and the external, meaning the one who's looking at you, is shared by coloniality in the same way African American experience can't be separated from the impacts of enslavement and racism. I'm trying to hone down of our responses to racism, and I'll get to it in here because this is very, very critical, because we're have been brought in the area of social science, in the area of history, in the area of research on race, and so on. Or a colonial, Eurocentric, and white. Transform to emulate. Lovely we purchase to whiten our bodies. Again, Fair and Lovely is one of the most widely creams in the world, including in many Muslim countries, to whiten your bodies. That process is actually rooted in self-hate and double consciousness. To the gaze of the other, that is looking at you in the novels that we read, the movies that we try to actually elevate, the media we devour, the political, and don't take a stock of this, then you are actually not having give you that in any other way. But the reality is that the Eurocentric worldview is colonial, white supremacist, and has total hegemonic presence around the globe, including the Muslim and our interaction and existence in the world. One that has to understand that. Now, when we approach the subject of race in America, and how race is located, I am sorry to say, in particular relative to Muslims who immigrated in here, or Muslims who are outside of the African American community who they immediately think just because the text or Islamic textual sources, at least the Quran and the Hadith, point toward an anti-racist epistemic. They point to an equality of all human beings, point to that all of us are from the same source. Ipso facto, I must be a person that is not racist, or that and conduct, whether in the mosque or in the businesses that we run, or in social interactions and so on. So in this sense becomes that we confuse the text, Quran, Hadith, and various Islamic historical texts, even though that one can point that there are texts that have some imprinted on it through interpretation, some racial elements. So I'm not the person that actually does not read the earlier historical text with an eye that looks and see where that interpretation was influenced. But in general, to take the text and jump over your own historical experiences shaped by colonization, by white supremacy, by domination of epistemology, and immediately assume that because you are Muslim, read the Quran Hadith, therefore you don't have heavy lifting to undo the racial structure that is embedded in your mind in a systematic way. And I think this has to be understood, and to understand the legacy, especially in America, but also the world system today is still Eurocentric, white, supremacist at its foundation. The racial hierarchy. So when we speak about African Americans, you're talking about 200 years of direct slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate but equal, 35 years of state-sanctioned redlining, and still till today we also have a prison industrial complex that is shaping and regulating the bodies and spaces of African Americans. So you cannot come, what I consider to be Muslim Johnny come lately, and all of a sudden Islam or anti-racism does not mean that Muslims are not embodying the race worldview that is embedded in the world in the past 500 years. And again, one can also touch that there are certain elements also from the systemic. This is what Malcolm X pointed to between the difference between house Negro and field Negro that he used in relations to his speech. And I'm sorry for using the term, but I'm quoting directly Malcolm X. He understood that, in essence, this attitude can be actually that the individual begin to see themselves in the experience and the attitude or perspective of the master. And therefore the house enslaved person begins to say we sick when the boss or the owner at the time of the plantation is saying they're sick. So again, one has to go through the process of understanding the impact of race and how race begins to manifest things that we need to take stock of. So when you say I'm not a racist person, or have not embodied any element of racism, the question becomes in which way have we undone this racism, and what work needs to be done. So dimensions of racism, often people only maybe focus on one. Well, I don't treat a African American wrong. I am nice to them. I hug them when they come to the mosque. All these are, again, can cover maybe one dimension, which is interpersonal. And even that, let me say, is very, very limited. Because that's only often is an engagement in a space that puts us together in an interpersonal relations, which is either before Friday, after Friday, or in events. Beyond that, there isn't actually much interpersonal communication. An example would be, how many African Americans do you have on your contact, phone contact and text message list? People that you actually, individuals from your community, from the Muslim community, that you could actually dial and text them. You text them to, really, as you saw the police officer murdering George Floyd at the time. Did you text them? Did you ask about them? Did you actually say how are you doing? How's your family? Do you need anything? All these are the interpersonal. So again, we are very good at the ceremonial. We confuse the ceremonial or these often constructed spaces to engage in nice. This is a dimension of racism where African American culture is often not included or appreciated. More often is actually either frowned upon or problematized. Then we get into the institutional racism, and increasingly people say there's no such thing as institutional racism. And again, I would possibly ask the individual who puts such a statement out, just basic, well, what research have you done? What empirical evidence can you bring forth? And what are the broader scholarship? And then also begin about the experiences of individuals, because you have the empirical evidence, and then you have the qualitative your opinion, which increasingly, again, everybody has an opinion, and you could get maybe a dime a dozen these days, but you need to separate between direct us to be not racist versus what is the institutions and the research on these institutions. The research, again, is overwhelming in this, and I looked at least on 18 different studies that looks at the scope of institutional racism and what is in there. And again, the evidence is overwhelming. Then the issue of internalized racism. I know this is very difficult to sometimes for members. Worshippers who are coming to the mosque that are African Americans, different than you treat a white person. Again, I'm Palestinian, also do you treat Palestinians coming in different than you treat, let's say, an African American? Assuming that you had, these nuances hip and the term, hoping that you're awake rather than only playing the woke type in these relationships. So how this internalized? Just think about all the people that you bring into the mosque and you celebrate. I'm very critical, again, for interfaith dialogue that's been going on, where it's actually interfaith dialogue only with white churches or possibly the members of the Jewish community. That's not interfaith dialogue, that's dialogue of a perception or a perception of dialogue with power. Because you assume that they can actually engaging in these. Then there is ideological dimension to racism, and it's heavy and has the burden on us, this ideological, especially increasingly on the right wing, but also very present in left wing. For example, left wing racism, ideological, say, oh, it's all about class. We just need to set us, there's no such thing as race is a byproduct and a function of class. And what ends up happening is we don't end up talking about race. And the same racial attitude that was present before, quote, liberation, oppression and post-oppression. So this is the ideological, all right? Or the right wing, you need to pull yourself out of your bootstraps. You're not putting yourself to that. So this is ideological. And then epistemic violence. Epistemic violence meaning not all knowledge that is knowledge that has equal standing. And epistemic violence is obliterating the experience, the knowledge production, the ability to uni-epistemic world, meaning that the world is Eurocentric and everything in the world fits in this, from media to clothing to discourse to the food. Everything is subject to it. So that's an epistemic violence because it actually eliminates the system of knowing that are specific to the community. And again, for Muslims, we need to understand what this epistemic violence that is done to us, and we continue to be participant in it, because if you don't recognize what you are experiencing and what's going on, then you have not yet actually undone the effects of it. So looking at racism and the wealth gap, which is one of the most important measures. Who controls all the wealth? And this is again before COVID-19, and I think it's going to be even much more. African Americans have, in terms of wealth in this country, is 2.6%. Latino families hold 2.3%. And white families hold 90% of the national wealth. That's just unimaginable. And you could actually break it down into the net worth. A black family earns almost 50% of what a white family earns. Now, immediately somebody say, well, this is again survival of the so you need to actually do the research. I know increasingly people point says, well, they have their own